The growth of humanity. What could that possibly mean? I think about these words and I wonder, what is my theme for today? What songs would suit this theme? What is my takeaway message? And how might I describe this theme in a children's story? I felt flustered while attempting to answer each of these questions. How was I supposed to express my sense of disconnect between the growth of a person and the growth of humankind? That I saw these two concepts as polar opposite to one another. And that I believe that the growth of one could actually inhibit the growth of the other. How do you express that concept through music, or in a children's story, or in a sermon? How do I express my thoughts when they are swirling around and are messy inside my own head, when I can hardly make sense of them myself? Well, I suppose the best way to explain something that is really hard to express is to start at the beginning and take one step forward at a time. There's no question in my mind, and I am certain anyone's mind, that our species has grown exponentially over the centuries. Anthropologists, sociologists, historians, biologists, and likely many, many more professionals in different fields of study would have scientifically verifiable proof of this fact. Humans matured from tribes of hunters, gatherers, to civilizations that cultivated the land. We developed tools that allowed us to communicate with the masses. We developed the printing presses, and we developed media. We have discovered truths about our world that at times seemed nonsense, and even things of fairy tales. Development has been made in our systems of government, in our methods of science and health developments, in our engineering and structure developments, and in our designs and technologies. Doctors have created vaccines to deadly diseases such as polio, diphtheria, and yes, COVID, SARS-2 disease. Scientists have put humans on the moon and sent robots to orbit Saturn. Engineers have built the Channel, a tunnel that travels 50.5 kilometers under the sea. And Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building at almost 1 kilometer high. And the Bang Na Bridge, the world's longest bridge for passenger vehicles, which reaches 55 kilometers. And yet, with all of this growth, we still have not solved some of the most basic needs of humankind: housing and shelter for everyone, making food and clean water available to all who need it, access to health care, creating a sense of security and a sense of belonging. The inequality gap among humans has grown substantially, depending on the different categories that are observed. When we observe this incongruency between the growth of humanity as the totality of human beings and the growth of humanity as the quality or state of being compassionate, sympathetic, or generous, then perhaps my discomfort and my inability to describe this theme might make more sense. When I started seminary, I thought I was going to be taking a degree in how to be a minister. I would be taking classes on how to prepare sermons and provide pastoral care. I would learn how our history and our polity and our governance structures have made Unitarian Universalist organizations who they are today. I believed that I would learn about church structure, how to support and build leadership, and how to perform rites of passage. And while all of these things were part of my education, they ended up being mostly the background information to process my own formation. Formation, the development of my humanity, the growth of myself as a moral person. My class assignments required that I examine my relationship with people who are different than me, people from a different culture than me. I was asked to remember an encounter from my personal life and think about the ways that that encounter could hold religious meaning. Where is the potential for revisiting the source of love, hope, compassion, community, justice? I was asked to ruminate on my pedagogy of learning and how that pedagogy would shift the way that I educated or ministered to people. I was constantly asked to observe my reactions to readings, interactions, assignments, and discussions. My seminary degree was a study of self, of the way that I interacted in the world, the way that I reacted to the world, and the way that I respond to the world. That I think of when I consider the concept, this is what I think of when I consider the concept of growing humanity, which is at such a juxtaposition of the growth of humanity. How much different would our world be if leaders of our countries were required to attend seminary, or even just attend classes where the main topic of study was themselves, where they had to truly look at their interactions with the world, their reactions to the world, and their responsibilities to the reality that we are living in before they were allowed to run for political office. Also, first responders and economists and bankers. What if lawyers and judges and CEOs had to take classes in empathy and compassion before starting their careers? I wonder if the men who all spent billions of dollars and millions of hours figuring out how to get themselves into outer space would have made different choices about those resources if they had been required to take a class where the main topic of study was themselves. The studies of humanities in primary and secondary school, also called social studies, is where students learn about culture, theirs and others, or current events, and perhaps small tidbits of psychology and sociology. Perhaps we need to engage the other definitions of humanity during these classes. The humanities of being human, what compassion looks like, what sympathy and empathy are, and what generosity looks like. If we taught everyone these skills, perhaps our world leaders and the most powerful people would be a list of individuals like Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, and Che Guevara. People who will let their hearts guide them, not their heads or their pocketbooks. The Reverend Dr. Tendayaka, UU theologian and scholar who wrote our poem, The Legacy of Caring, speaks of this disconnect, this misunderstanding between the humanity of the world and the humanity of the person. She stated, "Despair is my private pain, born from what I have failed to say, failed to do, failed to overcome. Be still, my inner self. Let me rise to you. Let me reach down into your pain and soothe you. I turn to you to renew my life." an attempt to reconnect to the humanity within herself, to let go of the despair, to soothe away the pain, to rise to her inner self, the self that is so harmed and feels so much failure, the self that she can renew. She goes on. I turn to the world, the streets of the city, the worn tapestries of brokerage firms, crack dealers, private estates, personal things in the bag lady's cart, rage and pain in the faces that turn from me, afraid of their own inner worlds. The humanity that she sees in the world, the humanity of the world that ignores the humanity of the person. This common world I love anew as the lifeblood of generations who refused to surrender their humanity in an inhumane world courses through my veins. And yet she can love this world, the humanity within it and the humanity that generations of people bring to it. Within this world, my despair is transformed to hope, and I begin anew the legacy of caring. She finds hope, even though the world is broken and falling apart, where women carry their belongings around in a cart, or where feelings of euphoria come from a small crystal rock. She can find hope, and she can create a practice of caring. In a society that ignores the legacy of caring, we see people collecting pop cans so that they can buy winter jackets. We see natural disasters reported by the cost of damages before we read about the number of people killed, displaced, or devastated by the disaster. We see people criminalized for addiction, mental health lapses, and the color of their skin. There is a financial penalization for being poor and financial gain for having money. In the humanity of the world, wealth is measured by the number of zeros in your bank account, the model of your car, the square footage of your house, and your age of retirement. Whereas in the humanity of people, wealth could look a lot different. In our story this morning, we were introduced to a young man who wanted a skateboard. He was tired of having to borrow his friend's old skateboard. He didn't like hand-me-downs, and his family was struggling to afford things, so there was no money for him to buy a new one. We are introduced to a gentleman who collects cans in a grocery cart. We know that he used to live in the apartment where the boy lives. His parents remember him being a neighbor, but now he collects cans and is in need of a winter coat. By the end of the story, Tim is reminded of the legacy of caring. He decides to give the money that he collected from the cans that he gathered to Mr. Peters, knowing that because of Tim's can collection, Mr. Peters didn't have enough money to buy his coat. This is an excellent illustration of how children can learn the empathy and compassion for others, how they can find hope and learn about the legacy of caring. But what isn't mentioned in this book is the systems and structures of the world that put Mr. Peters onto the street to begin with. It didn't talk about the banks making money from the interest on loans, nor the government failing to create systems where homelessness is no longer an issue. It does not talk about cycles of poverty that are near impossible to escape. The legacy of caring needs to go beyond individuals helping and supporting our communities. It needs to go to the places where systems of power start caring more about people on the margins, the people on the edges of society, than the people who line their pocketbooks. Could we change our world with schools focusing on humanity of people instead of the humanity of the world? Could we change our world if we started living into the legacy of caring? Could we change the world if governments stopped running campaigns of tasks to be checked off of our to-do lists and accomplishing achievements in a timely fashion? If they started to act as if the humanity of a person is more important than the humanity of the world? Is it possible to have a world where the people in power care more about the basic human needs of shelter and food, security, and a sense of belonging than they care about the growth of the economy, the growth of technology, the growth of society? What would that world look like? What problems could we fix if we started looking at the humanity of people instead of the humanity of the world? Thank you.